See some nods, good stuff. I definitely reiterate Imran's comments there with cameras. If you're, if you are able to put your camera on, it's so much nicer to see people's faces, and you are there, you are real. And keep the questions, as Imran said, keep the questions coming. A very little bit about me. I'll keep this super short, because you're not here to know about me. You're here to know about the core kind of content that we're going to dig into. As Imran said, over 30 years. That makes me feel very old, to be honest. I started way back in '92 as an Oracle analyst programmer. I dare say probably some of you that are logged in this evening, it might not have even been born at that point in time, so it makes me very old. I played all the accountabilities. I've been Scrum Master, developer, product owner, more recently coach, trainer, and as Imran said, I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. Been with them since 2019. Just things that interest me outside work. I'm keen on all sports. The thing that I've been most active in over the years has been running, hence a little picture of the London Marathon, which I've done a few times. It might kind of put people against me. There's a little picture of Liverpool Football Club there. That's my favourite football team. Some thumbs down. And I also love travelling. Travelling is a passion as well. So if you have amazing city travelling recommendations that you could make me aware of, that'd be fantastic. Oops. So there seems to be quite often this question, this conundrum. Which one should we choose? Should we choose Scrum or Kanban? And hopefully, by the end of this session, you'll see actually that we should be thinking more about the phrase Scrum and Kanban. How could they support each other to help us do awesome things? We'll start with some basic definitions. So first of all, what is Scrum? And I've taken this directly from the latest version of Scrum Guide, 2020. Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. There's a lot of individual words there that we could dig into. The only two that I'm going to dig into at this point is lightweight framework. So Scrum is a lightweight framework. It's the bare bones, the minimum. And it's lightweight, which means it doesn't tell you everything you need to be able to do your job. There's an expectation that you're going to need to pull in other things. What is Kanban? Again, I've lifted this directly from the latest version of the Kanban guide for Scrum teams, a strategy for optimizing the flow of value through a process that uses a visual work in progress limited pool system. Now, for the eagle-eyed amongst you, I've highlighted one word there, which appears in both of them, value. And that is ultimately why we do what we do. We're trying to generate value for people, to solve problems, to delight people, to give them something they want, something that they need, and to make the world a little bit better. There might be a number of topics throughout this particular presentation, by the way, that we could potentially go off into deep rabbit holes. Value is one of them. What is value? And if there's interest, we could definitely maybe look at another future webinar or blog post around what is value. But already we're seeing something which is starting to bring the two together, because they've got this emphasis, this focus around value. Right, I'll give this a little go. Hopefully this will work. I might be, word of warning, limited on the numbers of people that could do this. It looks like we've got about 35 at the moment, so fingers crossed we should be okay. I'm not an expert in Menti. Let's give this a go. I just want to get a little feeling for what's in your minds today, so that maybe I can tailor a little bit of the discussions as we progress. You can either scan the QR code that's on the screen, or you can type in menti.com and pop in that PIN number at the top. So please do that, and then you can put down as many options, answers as you feel are right for your context and your team. So throughput, story points, velocity, planning, poker, t-shirt sizing, absolute, days, hours, or something else not there mentioned. And I'll give you a moment or two just to add your thoughts about, what is it you use when you do estimation. Story points currently quite popular. Absolute precise estimation going on. A few more seconds then. If you haven't managed to get into Menti, if there's some kind of limit on the number of people, I do apologize. I just wanted to get a feel, and I'm getting that come across now. So quite a few people using story points, velocity, planning poker. Good stuff. I've got some other questions then. How do you feel about these statements? So I think there should be a little slider bar, hopefully in Menti. It should have gone on to the next question. Should be a little slider bar, and just move that somewhere across. So do you disagree? Leave it on the left-hand side. If you strongly agree, move it more towards the right-hand side. So if estimation is easy, you love it, it's always fantastic, slide your little slider along to the strongly agree on the right-hand side. And again, I'll give you a few moments just to do that. I'm fascinated by the one at the bottom, by the way. I didn't expect it to be that positive. Good stuff. A couple of things coming out of there. Estimation seemed to be wrong, is quite high. I think that's very, very natural, very common. Yeah, kind of disagreement on stakeholders easily understand story points. I'd agree with that. And as I said, I'm quite surprised that there's quite a reasonably high level of confidence that England will win the football Euros. Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. A couple of things I also want to tell you quite in the beginning is just to call out the difference between deterministic and probabilistic thinking. Now, deterministic forecast, what is a deterministic forecast? I thought I'll be clever here. I'll ask ChatGPT. So I typed that into ChatGPT. It's given me a long wordy description. Don't worry, you don't need to read that. I've kind of condensed that into something smaller for you. Ultimately, if we're talking about deterministic forecasts, ultimately it means we believe there's 100% certainty on a particular specific outcome. If we've got a number of pieces of work to do, a deterministic forecast would imply, okay, we've got these 20 things to do. We're 100% sure that we can get them done by the end of July. That's a very deterministic forecast. Maybe not so useful in a complex world where we're dealing with lots of unknowns, uncertainty. On the other hand, what is a probabilistic forecast? Again, I thought I'd be clever. Asked ChatGPT. It's come up with a longer description, but again, I've kind of put that into a more succinct few words for you. We acknowledge that there's a range of possible outcomes, and we assign a probability or likelihood of happening to each. So there's a number of possible different outcomes that could happen. And for each of those, we start to think about, what is the probability? What's the likelihood of that happening? So as an example, as things stand right now, this Monday evening, England, the England football team, do actually, and some people in England might disagree with this, England do actually have a chance of winning the European Championships. It could happen. There's a probability associated with that, and probably the probabilistic chance of Spain or Germany or France winning it is going to be higher than England's chance of winning it, I would think, at this point in time. But anybody that's left in the tournament, ultimately, they do still have a chance where they could win. There is a range of different outcomes. We don't know for sure at this point in time exactly who is going to win. We're surrounded in life by things thinking probabilistically, and that's the kind of mindset we're after when we explore flow metrics a little bit more. So some things, fairly common things that I've heard over the years around the Scrum events, and this obviously isn't an exhaustive list. This is just some that I've come up with. And as we go through these, and as I start to show you some of the flow metrics and how we can use them, I think they can really start to help answer and deal with these kind of common questions. So is there a quicker way to identify how many items we think we can get done in a sprint? We're in sprint planning. How many things do we think we can get done? Why do our daily scrums feel like status update meetings? You might have been told or heard, oh, they shouldn't be status update meetings. They're planning opportunities. They're opportunities to make a plan for the next 24 hours. Is there a quicker way to size product backlog items? You've already kind of started to indicate to me that, estimates are hard, difficult, normally they're kind of wrong. Maybe there's a different way. Customers come along to your sprint review. How can you tell them when they might get an item? It's an obvious common question that stakeholders, customers might ask. And maybe there's an easier, better way of answering that kind of question. What data points are useful to take a look at in a sprint retrospective? So hopefully you're already starting to take some data points in there, but this might give you some other ideas of other things that you could also take into a sprint retro. Do we have to use the 3 questions in the daily scrum? We do, don't we? I'm not going to go too deeply into those, but the 3 questions, they don't exist in the Scrum Guide now. You don't have to use them. That will almost like force a status update feel around your daily scrums. Maybe there's different ways, different techniques we can use. We'll look into all of these. Are we improving? Are we learning quicker? Are we delivering value earlier? Remember, it's all about the delivery of value. That's why we do what we do. What can help us better with forecasting? Maybe we're using velocity, but we're having problems with that, or story points. Maybe there's a different way. And answering another question, when will the next 25 items in your product backlog will be done? When will the next 10 items be done? How can we talk in a language our customers understand? I don't know about you, but in my experience, and I've used story points as an example with quite a lot of teams over the years, as soon as somebody outside the team hears about story points, quite often bad, difficult, challenging conversations happen. You don't need to go there. You don't need to have them. Is there a better way to conduct our daily scrum? So hook back to the comments I said on the 3 questions. Is our system becoming more predictable? We like predictability. People like predictability. We want predictability. So how can we start to see some of that? So we'll come back to these questions at the end of the session or towards the end of the session, and hopefully we'll have some thoughts, some indication of how flow metrics and how this strategy of Kanban, thinking around flow, can help us deal with some of these challenges. That's my aim. So story points and challenges that I've often seen and heard time and time again. How do you convert story points to hours and days? So if you are using story points, if you've ever tried to do that, what is a 2 story point? Is it 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 somethings? Is this item a 3? Is it an 8? And then we spend an hour kind of discussing it and planning poker, and then we do the work and it turns out to be a 2. Seen that loads of times. I can see some people laughing and smiling, so you've obviously been there as well. Doing some story point maths, or math if you're outside the UK. So a 1 + 2 + 2 = 5. That kind of mysterious story point math magic. Quite often, and certainly on my training sessions, for people that haven't come across story points, and if you're one of those people on this call that hasn't come across story points, you might be wondering, what the heck is a story point anyway? They can be confusing. They can be a little bit weird, a little bit painful. So it was an 8, and we've done half of it, and we get 4 points in this sprint, don't we? We get some kudos for that partial work done. You think that might make sense? And then you've got management. I've been in this situation as well. That team over there, their velocity is 25. This team over here, same number of people, but theirs is 10. What's going on here? Why is this team so bad? Why is this team so good? So management, quite often, I want you to increase your velocity. I want you to get more stuff done. Developers are there thinking, goodness, there has to be a better way, surely, doesn't there? And then stakeholders, if they do hear about story points, we're just totally, utterly confused at what people are talking about here in this mythical world of story points. So 4 clear flow metrics then. Let's get into the crux of this session. The first one is cycle time. So I would imagine you've all got work items that you progress with your teams. You're all going to have some kind of a workflow set up, a number of stages or states that your workflow items go through from start to finish. Now, you need to identify in your workflow a starting point, and you need to identify an end point. And a typical common way to get going is when you start working on an item, start the clock. And when you finish it, when it gets to done, stop the clock. And that period from start to finish, that's what's known as cycle time, the elapsed time, how long that clock was running for. You can have lots of different cycle times in your workflow, so you could measure lots of different start and end points. But as a minimum, it's quite nice, I think, to start off, when you start actually working on something through to when you get it to done. Throughput on the top right. So throughput is a count. It's the number of work items that we finish in a given period. It could be the number of things per day, per week, per sprint. It's a count, the count of things that we get finished. Bottom left, work in progress. The number of things started but not yet finished. So we've started the clock running on them, but it's still in flight. And how many do we have in flight? What's the count of those in-flight items? Not yet finished. So they won't yet have a cycle time because we haven't done them. And then the last one, which is still commonly referred to as a new kid on the block, although it's been around for quite a while now, work item age. And if you take away nothing else from this session, and I'm hoping that we'll plant lots of seeds in your mind that you will want to go off and explore, at least try and pay some attention to work item age, because so much good things can happen if you do start looking at your work item age. And work item age is that elapsed time from when we started a work item through to now. So how long has it been in flight for? Work item age. Cycle time scatter plot, the first of a number of charts and visuals that I'm going to show you on this session. Cycle time scatter plot. On the x-axis going across, we got some dates, some time series. And on the y-axis going up, we've got elapsed days. So what we're going to plot on this cycle time scatter plot is each time we complete a work item, we're going to pop a dot onto this cycle time scatter plot. So here's one. On the 10th of June, we completed a work item, and that took 10 days to finish. Elapsed days, 10 days. Pretty interesting. And then as we complete more work, we get more dots. So what's that? Kind of about the 13th of June, we finished something, took about 4 days to finish. And then we plot more. As work items gradually finish, we plot more dots on this cycle time scatter plot. The little colors on here might just be different work item types. So the reds might be production bugs, defects, that kind of thing. The ones non-red might just be standard backlog items. This on its own, as I'm showing you there, that might still be useful to feed into a retrospective. We could talk about outliers. Or we've got one here which looked like it took over 35 days to get done. Why was that? Is there something worthy of discussion, worth investigating? Could we do something differently next time? But maybe a little bit limited on its own in terms of what you can gain from that. But what we can do, we can draw some percentile lines on this cycle time scatter plot. And I've drawn there the 50th percentile. And what that means is 50% of the dots are above and 50% of the dots are below. So hopefully if you counted up all the dots on this image, half of them are above the line, half of them are below. And what that is saying, that if this was a data set for your actual team of things that you got done, half of your work, probably about 8, half of your work gets done in 8 days or less. So if someone comes up to you and says, hey, Paul, got this new work item, can you tell me when that's going to get done? You can say from your cycle time scatter plot, well, you've got a 50% chance of getting that in 8 days or less. Now, hopefully they would come back to me and say, well, That's interesting, Paul, but that's a toss of the coin. You know, I can't then schedule things off the back of that. Could you up it a little bit for me? So we could go to our 85th percentile, whereby 15% are above and 85% are below the line. For our data set, for the things that we have actually got completed before, we have an 85% chance of getting a work item done in 15 days or less. If they wanted to up it a little bit more, we could go, we could go to the 95th percentile, 5% above, 95% below. You've got a 95% chance of getting this work item in 25 days or less. Teams that I've used this with, generally, they tend to go with that 85th percentile as a good starting point. So you've got an 85% chance of getting something in 15 days or less for this example. And those two bits, the range and the probability, so 85%, 15 days or less, is something that we refer to as a service level expectation, SLE. A range and a probability. This is probabilistic thinking, not deterministic thinking. Here's a question for you, and I won't get you to answer anything or put things into chat. I've got no mentee. I just want you to think about this mentally. So certainly for those of you that have used story points or are using story points, the question for you to think about for a few seconds, can you compare story points with cycle time? I would imagine if you're thinking about that, you would be thinking something like, okay, work items with low story points, 1, 2, 3, would have a low cycle time, i.e. they get through your system quicker. And things with higher story points, 5, 8, 13, would have a higher cycle time. I would imagine that's probably what's going through your minds right now. But no, you can't. You cannot compare story points with cycle time. This is an example from a team that I worked with not that long ago. This is very, very typical what I'm showing you here. So we've got story points on the bottom, cycle time going up. We've got some things here on the left with a story point of 1, so a low story point estimation, taking 22 days to do. We've got something over on the right-hand side that had 8 story points, which took 4 days to get done. I could almost guarantee after this session, maybe not this evening, but some point after this session, if you were to go away and to plot something similar for your data sets, cycle time versus story points, almost certainly you would get something similar to that, i.e. there's no correlation between the two. There just isn't. And I've seen this time and time and time and time again. These are more and more examples. I do regular sessions on flow metrics, and somebody was working at a tier 1 investment bank and ran those kind of comparisons for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of teams within their organization, and they validated as well, no correlation. Imran, go for it, sir. I think maybe we've got a question.
Yeah, Paul, not my question, is from Darren actually, has put in the chat. Should the cycle time chart be broken down by story size?
Should the cycle time chart be? No, because what happens is when we've got that SLE, so say 85%, 15 days or less. Great question, by the way. Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Imran, for raising it. If we imagine if we've got a new product backlog item that we're talking about, we're getting a good shared understanding of it. The only question then we need to ask as a team about to kind of work on this item at some point, do we think that fits within our SLE? If the answer to that is yes, awesome, fantastic, move on. Next one, please. If we felt it was bigger than our SLE, if our gut feel was that it's bigger, so if we thought actually, you know, we think this is going to take more than 15 days, we would split that down, or we would look to split it down into smaller items, whereby each one we would think, yeah, that, you know, we've got a good feeling that that could get done within our SLE. And that approach, that's actually called right size estimation. We're right sizing a piece of work against that SLE. So when you see the you know, the various dots and elapsed time on the scatter plot. That's very common. That's very normal. So we're not saying this is going to get done in 15 days. It could be 1 day, 2 days, 13 days, 14 days. Our gut feel, based off the conversation to give us the understanding, we think at the moment we can get it done within our SLE. But then, of course, as we start to progress the work, as we start to move on and better understand it, if at any point we thought it would start to compromise our SLE, again, we've got opportunity to do something about it and split it down into smaller items. A little bit more to come on that later on. It was Darren, wasn't it? Darren, does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I actually asked that question just before you kind of explained.
Oh.
It's like that's not the way to do it. So yeah. Fine.
Awesome. Good stuff. Good stuff. I can see another hand up there. Maru?
Yeah, thanks. Paul, just because I'm surprised at the answer you gave Darren, because your charts here just show exactly what he was asking about.
So these charts here that I'm showing, these are basically, there's no correlation between cycle time and story points.
Yeah, of course. Okay, I understood his question just about whether or not, you know, you could plot some breakdown of those cycle times by story point size, which is what the charts were showing. But I get your point about no correlation. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but by all means, you know, at some future point, go away and plot one of these for your team, your data points. I could almost guarantee, if I'm a betting man, and I'm a betting man, I like poker, I'd have a small wager that yours is going to look something similar. You know, no correlation. Cool. Any other questions at this point, Imran, or shall I? No, I'll crack on. So don't do it. Don't try and convert the two. So let's see some of this in action then. I'm going to open up a tool now. Let me get the right window. Some caveats off, first of all. This is a tool that I'm using to just show you some more about flow metrics. I'm not employed by Actionable Agile. I've got a free license for it. Hence, I can use this as part of demos like this. If this is something that interests you, there's a number of good options out there, one of which is Actionable Agile. Spend some time, do some evaluation, see what looks interesting. There's lots of Excel spreadsheets online as well that you can download. You can plot some of these simply in Excel to get you going to start being able to use some of this data. So I'm just going to start with Actionable Agile in the first instance. And there's a number of charts in here on screens. I'm not going to go through all of them. Lost my mouse. Where's my mouse? Here it is. There's a number of charts in here. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to go through the ones which I think are more relevant for this discussion today. So you can see our cycle time scatter plot here. Lots of dots, lots of completed work items. Again, we can see some outliers near to the top. We can see our percentiles over there on the right. So we've got 85%, 16 days or less. And the thing about using data like this is that you want to use data which you feel is most representative of your likely future. So if you've been doing this for a while and you've made some awesome changes and your cycle time has been coming down, so you're getting things out quicker, you're getting to value earlier, you're closing the feedback loops earlier, which is all wonderful. You don't want to be using data from 12 months ago. You want to be using more recent data that you feel is representative of the future. This is quite a nice tool because one of the things you can click on down here. So if I thought, this data set here, this is more representative of our future. This is recalc our percentile, our SLEs, 85%, 14 days or less. Another caveat I should say, I know that the teams at Actionable Agile have been working on some enhancements and fixes to this application recently. When I first logged in this morning, just to give this a quick spin, I was presented with a note: major upgrades to Actionable Agile. Oh no, don't do that to me on a day of a meetup when I'm going to use it. But I think it's good. If there's anything buggy, we can feed that back to them. Cycle time scatter plot on here. Some of these you might be able to see. There's a little 2 there in a circle. So what that means is on the 24th of March, 2 things were completed that had a cycle time of 15 days. Because obviously you can complete multiple on a certain day, and they could have the same cycle time. Throughput run chart, slightly interesting. This is how many things did we get done per day? Tom, go for it.
Hi, Paul. Just quickly go back to the scatter plot.
Yeah, sure.
If we don't expect, if the expectation is that there isn't a correlation between time and story points,
Yep.
So I've kind of got my own view on. I know there's multiple views on the value of estimations, but why would we estimate if we accept there's no correlation? If you lived in a perfect world, would there be?
Yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, this kind of takes story points off the table entirely. If you're struggling with story points, this using flow metrics can just completely remove all of that for you. And if you're not using story points at the moment, you probably don't want to go there. You could go straight to here, flow metrics. It'll make a bit more sense actually when I talk about Monte Carlo sims and how they run and how they fit together. Probably make more sense.
Right. Yeah, because that just uses backlog items, doesn't it? Yeah, I get your point now.
Cool.
Well, thanks, Paul.
You're welcome. Do keep the questions coming. And apologies as well, I should have said right at the front, I tried to make my training courses really super interactive and collaborative, and like the one that Imran came on a while back. This session is a bit more obviously me just trying to give you some data and information to set you on this path, hopefully. So throughput run chart, yeah, this is the count of how many things per day. So if I look at this one here, for example, on the 17th of March, we got 7 things done. So 7 things moved to done on the 17th of March. I could click on that. I think on here it tells you the different items, and these potentially most likely would have different cycle times. They started at some point, but they all ended on that day. Hopefully when you look at a throughput run chart, you'll see pairs at the bottom there where we got nothing done. Now, fingers crossed they're weekends. Hopefully you haven't got people going into weekends and getting stuff done and that kind of thing. We're going to use throughputs in just a moment. So not super useful when you look at that in isolation, but when you feed that into a Monte Carlo simulation, the world changes. The world changes. Cumulative flow diagram. We could easily spend the whole session today just talking about CFD's cumulative flow diagrams. Maybe that's another topic for another day. You can get a good indication of the health of your system just by looking at a CFD. One of the things that I typically look at immediately when I go into CFD, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. One of the features they've added to this, let me just change that a little bit. You can click on here and it zooms into that a little bit. So these different colors here, these are the different states that you've got in your workflows. So for this particular team, their first state, analysis active. They start the clock running when they move something into analysis active. That's the little orange bit at the top. The darker blue bit at the bottom is the done, the end point of their workflow, when they stop the clock. Now the gap between the top and the bottom, the gap between the top of the orange one and the top of the darker blue, that gap, that is your work in progress. That's how many things you've got in flight at a point in time. So how many things have entered your system but haven't yet exited your system. And if that gap grows, if those lines are widening, you're starting more things than you're finishing. Your system is becoming more unpredictable. That's not a good place to be. Let me just reset the zoom. I think over here there's rate lines. Let's show them. So I've just put these rate lines on here, and they're basically tracking the gradients of those two lines, the very top orange and the top of the darker blue. And you can immediately see on that visual, they're diverging. Those lines are diverging. You got more plates spinning at the end than you first started off with. Your WIP is increasing. Your work in progress is increasing. There's a nice phrase, I suspect most of you have heard it, stop starting, start finishing. If you've got 20 things to do, the worst thing you can do is start all 20 all at once, because they will all just take longer. Stop starting, start finishing. We'll maybe come back to CFDs on another day, on another discussion. Cycle time histogram, bar charts, time series data. The jury is out as to how useful, but this can give you a quick visual. This is frequency going up, cycle time going across the bottom. So you want bigger blocks, bigger lines, bigger charts towards the left-hand side where you have more things that have low cycle time, because more things are getting through your system quicker. You don't want to be having big tall lines over here on the right-hand side, so you've got a lot of things taking a long time to get through your system. You can get a little feel for your system from a cycle time histogram. Source data, I probably should have started here really. Source data, this is the example data for this team. Looking at that first item there, item ID 10001, you can see it doesn't have a value in the done date, which means it won't have a cycle time because we haven't finished, but it will have a work item age. It's been aging since the 15th of June. We started it on the 15th of June. It's still in flight. It's got a work item age. When we get it to done, value will appear in there and it will have a cycle time. Whereas the fourth one down, that does have a value, so that will have a cycle time. It will have an elapsed time of how long that took to finish from start to end. To use this, to use flow metrics, the bare minimum that you need, the bare minimum is a start date and an end date. And I'm sure you've got that in your systems already, hopefully, start date and end date. And to start to drive out some SLEs, service level expectations, you don't actually need that much data points. 10, 12, it's going to be enough to get you going. A small number of data sets. But as long as that 10 or 12 data points you feel are pretty representative of your future, then you can start using it. Right. Monte Carlos, let's get into these because this is where it starts to get more interesting, I think. So Monte Carlo, how many? This is trying to answer the question, how many things can you get done in a period of time? It's run some simulations, and I'll talk in just a second what simulations are. You can see at the top it's run 10,000 trials, and I'll go through exactly what a trial means. But for here, what this is telling us, and this is based on fact, this is based on the underlying data of things that we've progressed in our system, things that we have actually finished. This is telling us you have an 85% chance of finishing 26 or more things, and by default that's 2 weeks, isn't it? 2 week sprint. So imagine we're all here today doing sprint planning, we're using 2 week sprints. How many things do we think we can get done? This is telling us we have a pretty good probability, an 85% chance of finishing 26 things or more. Don't forecast 30, 40, 50. Why would you? The data's not telling you that. Maybe you're one of the many teams that gets hit by unplanned work, which hits you mid-sprint. Maybe you're going to forecast 15, 20. You're going to hold something back for that unplanned work. Now, the way it's done this is it's used throughput, and it's looked back. So if we said 2 weeks as our trial run, what's the chances here for 2 weeks? How many things can we get done in a 2 week period? What it's done is looked back at all our past data. It's picked a day completely at random and said, how many things did you get done on that day? And then it's picked another day at random. How many things did you get done on that day? And then another day and another day. And it's built up this virtual 2 week sprint, this 2 week period. And that's one trial. How many things did we get done in that virtual trial? And then it's done it again, trial 2, trial 3, trial 4. And it's quickly done that 10,000 times to come up with this probability, 85% chance of 26 things or more. Because that's what the data is telling us. That's what the actual past data is informing. Now, if I gave you a coin and I said, flip the coin, what's the chances of getting a heads? You're going to come back to me and say, well, it's 50%, Paul, 50%. Now, you could do a Monte Carlo sim on that. I mean, if you wanted to, you could flip a coin 10,000 times after 10,000 times, most of them, half will be heads and half will be tails. You know, you've got a 50% chance of getting heads. If you were to roll 2 dice and add up the total on the 2 dice, you'll get again a number between 2 and 12 if you add them up. You could, if you rolled them 10,000 times and added them up, you'll get something similar to this, where the highest block, the highest chart is 7, because that's your most likely outcome when you roll 2 dice and add them together, 7. Keep in the back of your minds for now, 85% chance, 26 things or more. I'm going to hit this add trials button at the top. This is going to run more simulations. And we're going to see, will that change that 85% chance? And what I would expect is that it becomes a smoother bell curve. So let's try it. Let's run this. There used to be an option that you could stop this, and I do hope they put this back because that was useful. I've got to let it run to 1 million. I'll keep talking while it goes to 1 million. It won't take that long. It hasn't changed yet. 85%, 26 things or more, nearly there. There we go. So it's done 1 million trials on that previous data set, and it hasn't changed. You've still got an 85% chance of finishing 26 or more work items. So hopefully you can start to see where you could use that in sprint planning. Could be super powerful. The clever mathematicians out there, they've deemed 10,000 trials. That's the, you don't need to go beyond 10,000. Once you've got the data of 10,000, it's not going to change that much more going forwards. So that's why it runs 10,000 initially. So that's a Monte Carlo. How many? You can, things like this, you can actually change the date. So if we thought, rather than 24, if we were doing 1 week sprints, 1st of July, that's going to do 1 million for us, isn't it? That's annoying. Should just do 10,000. It's a little feature. But if we were doing 1 week sprints, we're in sprint planning here again today. We've got an 85% chance of finishing 8 or more work items. What are we going to take into a sprint? Imran, go for it, please.
There is a question in the chat. How much data set or sprints do we need to start using Monte Carlo?
Yeah, great question. I touched on that very quickly. You don't need that many. If you've got about 10, 12 data points, that's good enough to get started. If you're starting completely from scratch, if you're doing 2 week sprints, maybe chop that in half, maybe have your first SLE 85%, 5 days or less as aspirational. But you're going to start to get some data points pretty quickly. Most teams will have data points already. 10 or 12 is generally enough. I think tools like this, I think if you've got less than 10, they probably don't start rendering and showing some of the Monte Carlo sims. 10 or 12, get going. Do feel free, by the way, obviously, you know, if there's follow-up questions to my answers, please do pine in. Is there any other questions at all at this point?
Mike, you want to speak about what you have posted in the chat? No?
Maybe he's gone for a drink. Maybe he's gone to Google Flowmetrics.
Is my mic working?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you, Mike. Go for it.
Yeah, I was just an observation that's interesting. You set it to 1 week and it's 8 items, and it was on 2 weeks previously and it's 26. You
Yeah.
might have thought that it would have been 16.
Possibly proportional, yeah, but the data's not telling us that. You know, it's run 10,000 trials. This is what it is telling you. You've got an 85% chance. If you're doing 1 week sprints, 8 or more, 2 week sprints, 26 or more. That's the way the Monte Carlo sims have come out.
That's just super interesting.
Yeah, it's a great observation, actually. I think you're right. Most people would naturally, if I did that the other way around, you know, 1 week 8, so then 2 weeks 16, 3 weeks 24, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's doing it differently for us. But it's based on fact again. Let's go for the other Monte Carlo version, which is when. So rather than how many, this is when. So we've got a chunk of really important things at the top of our product backlog. When are we going to get that? When's it going to be done? And here we've gone straight in. It's run 10,000 trials again. And it said, okay, you've got an 85% chance and the simulation control is 100. So your top 100 things in your backlog, you've got an 85% chance of getting that by the 6th of August. Now, hopefully somebody's not asking about 100. Maybe let's go with 25. Somebody's interested in the top 25 items in your product backlog. You've got an 85% chance of getting that by the 7th of July. What's your top 25? But obviously this is, this is continually evolved. We're continually reforecasting, replanning, new things come in, our product backlogs change, they're emergent. We can continually update these on the fly with our actual data. Any other questions at all on Monte Carlo Sims? Any other questions that have come in on the chat at all?
No more in chat, Paul.
Okay, I will crack on, but
We
obviously
have addressed them from the chat.
Dude,
Anybody else has any
dude.
questions on? No. Let's continue.
no, that's okay. Which other ones do I want to share? That's the Monte Carlo Sims. The other nice one on here, which is a great one, aging work in progress. Oh, Darren, there's a question. Go for it, Darren.
Well, there's a comment really. So the dividing down, surely that would be demonstrated in your cycle time. If your average cycle time was 5 or more, you wouldn't fit it into the week, hence your discrepancy.
Yeah, so if your cycle time is 5 or more, it wouldn't fit into a week. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so if your cycle time is longer than your sprint length, you've got some things to explore there. Agent work in progress, a great chart and visual to use in your daily scrums. So these little dots here, these represent work items that are in flight. They're in progress. They're in progress, so they have a work item age. They're yet to get a cycle time. They're moving towards getting a cycle time. Now, ones with circles is where there's multiple in that particular phase, that state, and they've got the same age against them. So if I click on this one, for example, we've got 2. Is it going to tell me? There we go. We've got 2 work items here. They're both currently in analysis done, and current age at the top there is 3. So they've been in flight for 3 days, work item age for 3 days. Now these are shown in the green area, which means we're not too worried about those. We're not too worried. They're progressing okay. They're progressing well. Whereas these ones here, which are starting to go into the more amber color ones, these have a current age of 8. So they've been in flight for 8 days, but they're still just in dev active. We might have some alarm bells ringing for these that, these might not be in line for being done within our SLE. These might be at risk. Is there something we need to do on them? Is there something blocking them? Is there something getting in their way, slowing them down? What can we do to speed them up through our process? Do we need to split them down into smaller items? It can help trigger some of these good conversations in your daily scrums. Obviously, with a caveat still, though, that 15% of our work is still going to be done above that SLE. So 15% is still going to be above that SLE. Super useful for your daily scrums. I probably wouldn't use it every day in your daily scrums, but maybe 2 or 3 times a week is a nice one. Right. I'm keeping an eye on the time. I think that's everything I wanted to show you in actionable.
Quick one,
Yeah.
Paul, from my side, actually. This tool, now typically, and there is a comment in the chat as well, typically teams tend to use Jira quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any ways for us to connect the Jira data to this tool, or
Yeah,
the data has to be fed in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this has got some nice API plugins, Actionable Agile. So definitely it can sit on top of Jira. I used it with Azure DevOps ADO. It sits quite nicely on top of that as well, fairly seamless. But I'm not, I'm not employed by Actionable Agile. I'm not part of their company. I would.
You might as well. They might as well.
I would encourage you to explore the options out there. If you're using story points and this sounds of interest, Run it in parallel. I've had teams do that. You know, look at it in parallel with your story points. But again, every team that I've done that with, pretty soon they've then dropped the story points and just focused on using flow metrics. Flow metrics are awesome.
Thanks.
Right. So what does this ultimately kind of then mean for the Scrum events? So in sprint planning, we can quickly know how many items we can forecast in this sprint with a pretty high, reasonable degree of probability. You know, we've got an 85% chance of getting 26 things or more done. Maybe hold some back, like I said, for unplanned things, but it can give you that instantly. Within your daily scrums, we can better see what product backlog items need some attention, i.e. which of the things that are in flight that you're spinning with at the moment are potentially at risk for missing your SLE. What needs some care and attention? What's your plan today for getting those things back on track? The sprint review, you've got your stakeholders there, hopefully. We can more easily answer questions like, when will it be done? A very valid question that people ask us, you know, either for a single item or for a number of items. We can very quickly answer those questions and change it on the fly as things change and emerge and evolve. And then retrospective, you can better use our actual data to bring meaningful change. There's a lot of data points here that you could unpack, dig into, explore. How could we change things to bring our cycle time down, for example? So if we go back to the questions that I had right near to the start of this question, is there a quicker way to identify how many items we think we can get done in a sprint? Well, yes, there is. We can use a Monte Carlo simulation. How many? 85% chance, 26 things or more. Why do our daily scrums feel like status update meetings? Probably because you're using those 3 questions. Maybe instead use work item age. You know, use that aging chart. Which things look like they're at risk? Which things look like they need attention? Is there a quicker way to size product backlog items? I think there is. You can right size according to your SLE. We've got this new piece of work to do. Do we think we can get that done within our SLE? Do we think we can get that done within 16 days or less? If not, split it. If we can, awesome. Let's right size, estimate it, move on. How can you tell a customer when they might get an item? You can use your service level expectation. You've got an 85% chance of getting that in 15 days or less. If they've got things then they want to plan off the back of it, this is about their level of risk. You know, what's the level of risk they're willing to take? You can't give 100% certainty. That's deterministic thinking. In a complex world with unknowns, with variability, where things change, you cannot plan complexity perfectly. What data points are useful to take a look at in a retro? Well, you've got your cycle times, your WIP, work item age, throughput. It's starting to give us a lot more things that we can unpack and dig into. But we have to use the 3 questions. No, you don't. You can look at work item age according to your SLE. So what is aging not in the style that you would like? What needs attention? Are we improving? Are we learning quicker? Are we getting value out there earlier? We can look at our trend in cycle time. So is our cycle time going down? And CFD as a whole. CFD is a great way to explore the overall health of your system. What can help us better with forecasting? Monte Carlo sims, both the how many and the when. If you get questions, when will the next 25 items in your product backlog be done? Well, you can use a Monte Carlo sim. When? You've got an 85% chance by the 10th of August. How can we talk in a language our customers understand? Well, all of this is in real elapsed days. It talks in their language, in a language they understand. So assume we're at the start of December, you know, we're on the 1st of December and somebody says, hey, Paul, when am I going to get this thing? And we say, oh, 30 days. And they might think, well, actually, you know, weekends, Christmas holidays, what you really mean is probably the tail end of January. But we don't, you know, 30 days, 31st December. We're talking in their language. Is there a better way to conduct your daily scrums? Yeah, you can look at your work item age according to your SLE. And is our system becoming more predictable? You can review your CFD. You know, are those trend lines expanding? Are they fairly parallel? Have you got a more kind of predictable system? So kind of drawing this to a bit of a close, I guess, there's a book out there. It's called The Floor of Averages, the floor as in FLAW. And the punchline for that entire book ultimately, and this might be a spoiler for you, plans based on average fail on average, so don't use averages. And the trials, the simulations, the Monte Carlo sims, that's using things which aren't averages. It's using simulations. This idea of right size estimation against your SLE is quick. It's fast. You know, try and spend more of your time actually progressing your work items, because then actually you start to learn more about the items when you progress them. Do remember that if you are using story points, there isn't a correlation between story points and cycle time, but by all means, go away, plot it, see what you get, let me know, be interested to hear the results. We're talking in the language of our customers, elapsed days. We focused here today, or I focused more at the lower level, you know, product backlog items and how you can use this at that lower level. You can extrapolate this up. It's a little bit outside the scope for today, but you can right size features and epics. So you, broadly speaking, you know, 85% of your features might have 20 items or less within them. If you get a feature that started to get 30, 40 things, you might want to split that feature down. So you can roll this up. And if we start to look at flow metrics, it can really help us ask the right questions sooner. You know, particularly at work item age, if things are aging unnaturally, not quickly enough, we can start to do something about that sooner rather than later. The guy that created Story Points, Ron Jeffries, he's written a blog post as well to apologize. I may have invented them, and if I did, I'm sorry. I'm not here today to bash Story Points either, by the way. If you use Story Points, if you get value, awesome, happy days, because right back to the start, this is about delivering value. Go for what works for you, but if you wanted an alternative, if you wanted to explore, you know, the strategy of Kanban within your Scrum context, there's some good value to be had, I think. Other kind of follow-on bits, there's a great course out there. I'm obviously a Scrum.org trainer. There's a great course which combines the two. If you wanted to nerd out for a couple of days with me, maybe that's worth exploring. There's some good free articles out there worth having a look at. The first two, the Kanban Guide for Scrum Teams and the Flow Metrics for Scrum Teams on the Pro Kanban website. It's a great book, lots of great things in there. If you wanted one of my favorite books about all of this, one when I first started to get into this kind of space, Dan Vacanti's Black Book there, the bottom to the right, When Will It Be Done, is a great read. I totally recommend that. There's an absolute ton of free, high quality content available to you on Scrum.org website. You can go on the All Resources option. You can search. There I've searched Scrum with Kanban. So there's a whole load of blogs and other videos and other recommendations and white papers and webinars. Explore what's there, and it's growing by the day. Some other favorites of mine, I would have to mention Drunk Agile again, Dan Vacanti. It's a great series, lots of great amusing episodes on there. They introduce a different whiskey each one, and then they start to talk about some agile concept. Start with episode 1, story points, that might wet your whistle, so to speak. Fixing Your Kanban, a great series by a couple of, well, they're all professional Scrum trainers actually, Ryan Ripley, Todd Miller, and Dan Vacanti. The top right one there, I quite like some of his work as well. And there's some plenty of Excel spreadsheets that you can download and start to play with some of this data as well. So you can use both. You know, it's a myth that you have to choose between them. Scrum can be more effective, I think, if you've got this mindset of flow. You know, think about some of these Kanban strategies around flow. And equally, I guess I focus more on the, you know, Scrum can be enhanced by thinking about some of these Kanban aspects. But I think the reverse is true as well, that if you're, if you're a pure Kanban, then maybe some of the Scrum aspects can help as well. Maybe it's a good idea to come together every day or so to do a plan for how we're going to work and collaborate with each other. Maybe it's a good idea to take some time out every now and then to think, how could we do things differently to make us even more awesome? i.e. retro. Works both ways. That is pretty much what I would like to cover. I hope we've still got a little bit of time left for any questions that we haven't managed to get to. Over to Imran and Tom to fire any more questions at me, or anybody else individually. If you'd like to ask me anything, feel free.
Great. Any questions, please? There's one from Maru actually. Didn't they run out of whiskey kinds by now? Brilliant question.
Say that again, sorry, Imran, question?
The question is, didn't they run out of whiskey kinds by now?
Yeah, it's surprising actually just how much whiskey they drink. Yeah, and they're obviously connoisseurs. It's a great series. I mean, joking aside, they do talk about lots of Kanban things. The episodes range from about, I'm going to say 10 minutes to half an hour, sometimes a little bit longer. Work your way through. There's so much good free content out there. Have a little look, have a rummage.
Good, thank you. Any questions, please, before we?
Hi, sorry, I've got a question.
Yeah,
Yes,
go for it.
You said you were going to talk about the correlation between story points and days. You've not said anything about that.
I thought I did actually. I would ultimately challenge you. Go away and plot it. If you think there is a correlation between story points and cycle time, by all means plot it for your data, for your team, and see what you come up with. I can almost guarantee there won't be any correlation between the two. So you'll have some things with low, small story points that take this long. Yeah. And you'll have things which have a high story point that take this long. Almost guarantee it.
So as Scrum Masters, how do we explain this? Because most times they always think, developers as well think that if you say 2 story points, it equates to 2 days. What's the best way of going around this?
The best way is show them the proof, plot that data and prove to them there isn't a correlation. And if they're having trouble with story points, in my experience, and probably, I mean, taking a step back, if I was working with agile teams maybe 3-4 years ago plus, I would be trying to get away from absolute precise estimation and into relative estimation, so story points. More recently, over the last few years, I would try and encourage teams to think about flow metrics and away from story points. I'm a firm believer that, at some point, story points will be in the agile museums and never to be touched again. And hopefully you'll remember this meetup. Yeah, I remember when Paul said that. What were story points again? Why did we think they were a good idea? Maybe. But equally, as I said earlier, if they're giving you value right now, awesome, because it is ultimately about delivering value. So if you have something that works for you, go for it. But Olu, plot it and let me know how you get on.
So does that mean that the concept of velocity wouldn't work anymore then?
Yeah, you don't need velocity then. If you're using velocity is just a number, and the only thing it's good for in life is forecasting.
Okay.
And it's an output metric. It's all about output rather than outcome. Whatever you're doing, we should be thinking outcome rather than output. Maximize outcome, minimize output. Think about the outcomes. Think about the change of behaviors that we're after from people. We're doing things to make people's lives easier and better and change the world and do good things and solve problems. These are the outcomes we're after rather than just pure output. Velocity is an output metric. It bears no resemblance to value whatsoever. Maru, Olu, does that help?
Yes, it does.
Cool.
It does. Thanks.
Maru.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I have 2 questions. One is about WIA. If you could just show the chart or maybe the slide. I don't know if it was a live screen share or just a slide. The one with the breakdown of the workout image across states. I don't know if it was a slide.
Oh, okay.
I think it was a live share. Yes, this one.
Yep.
So just trying to understand this. This is not a simulation. This is data visualization.
Yeah, this is I mean this is a sample data set. So it's this data set here, which is feeding into the visualizations that you see. But what this is then saying is, okay, we've got the SLEs overlaid on here. 85% of our work gets done in 16 days or less. It's overlaid those percentiles, and all the circles are things that are actually in flight today. They're in progress, and it's indicating how far through they are in progress and what is their work item age. Because if you've got things in analysis done, if you've got things nearer to the start of your workflow that have a big item age, they should be jumping out at you. You know, these are things that warrant some attention and some love and some care. What can you do to get those moving again? Because they're at risk for not being done within your SLE.
But I think the states with done and done, those two dones are buffer states, so it's not a problem if you have a high.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you think, I mean, these are analysis done. These could have been sat in analysis done for 6 days or something. I think there's a stalled.
Yeah, it would only mean that the following state is a bottleneck or just stuck, the dev active or.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe there's something going on in dev active, which is why we haven't pulled something from analysis done. But it's aging. It is aging in analysis done, and that's not good. How do we get that moving again ultimately?
So is what you're trying to show us here that you could define thresholds per state, because each one of them has different thresholds.
So the percentiles are kind of worked out for you based off your actual data sets. But in terms of, if you mean threshold in terms of what WIP limits, that's another bigger probably conversation. That how do you determine your WIP limits? And there are many different ways to establish and determine your WIP limits.
No, I didn't go there. That's the dark magic arts of.
But to be honest, you say that, but to be honest, go with some kind of approach for your WIP, but accept that probably from the outset you're going to be wrong anyway. You're going to be learning, adjusting, tweaking to get the optimal.
I mean, the point with WIP limits is to help you adapt your system. So they have to be changing by definition, but most teams don't like that. Like that, you have to keep them changing. It's not like you look for the optimal WIP limit per state and then you find it and somehow work is going to flow. They're meant to help you adapt because things keep changing.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is going to allow you to see where you do need some care and attention. Now, you can talk about your WIP limits in a retro. How do we feel about our WIP limits? Do we feel they're set right? Do we need to tweak? Do we need to adjust them somewhere? In a way that we could bring our cycle times down, we can get things flowing quicker, we can get value out, we can close the feedback loops earlier.
Okay. No, I totally agree. Now, what I meant by thresholds was I actually made a wrong assumption. I thought the red, orange, yellow, blue, green were, I didn't know they were calculated for you. It's also based. What is it based?
There's some clever stuff going behind the scenes in terms of how it determines the color coordination on here. I think there's a separate blog post or video by Actionable Agile which explains how they've chosen to do those colorings, but you can just you can quickly get a visual in terms of what color it's in. If it's green, that's okay, it's progressing well. If it's outside the green, probably wants some attention, in a nutshell.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to look at the behind the scenes to understand the machinery. My second question was whether or not you've ever played with a real or toy data set where the data you've plotted was not based on story points but on measured value. I've never seen it actually done. People value the whole time, but
so to be clear, none of this in here is on story points. This is actual elapsed time. This is real time. The value aspect, I think, is another massive conversation because it comes back to the question probably, what is value? What is value? That might be a good topic for another meetup, maybe. What is value? What are things worth measuring? What are things that aren't worth measuring? If you to plant another seed in your mind, if I did a session like that, I would be talking about something called evidence-based management. Maybe we can send out the link to everybody on the call about evidence-based management, EBM. There's a guide on scrum.org. If you're trying to establish, what metrics might make sense for you to measure for your context, have a look at EBM. There's some example ones there. Talks about different key value areas and the metrics within the areas. But certainly one thing you wouldn't find in the world of EBM, and when we talk about proper value, you wouldn't find is velocity, because that doesn't mean real value at all. Maru, does that help a little bit?
That's awesome. I mean, any conversation contribution is awesome. Yeah, it answers all my questions.
Yeah, EBM, evidence-based management. Have a look for that. Maybe we can get a link in the chat channel if there isn't one already. EBM on scrum.org. Definitely agree. This is great.
I put it in the chat.
Brilliant. Thank you, Imran.
In my backlog for certifications for the past 4.5 years, so never managed to have time to
as long as you're continually looking at your backlog and you're taking things in flight and you're looking at the work item age as you start to progress them. Good stuff.
Any more questions?
Grant.
Yeah, Grant, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually, this is great timing, because on Saturday I was at the South Florida Agile Association, and I'm just seeing Taz Brown's name there, and she ran a session using Twig, which is the simulation that has the actionable Agile reports behind it. And I just thought that was just perfect timing, great connection. So if anybody kind of wants to have a look at that, you can have a play, and see how adjusting whip limits. Oh, in fact, yeah, there it is. And
agree, completely agree, Grant. Yeah, absolutely. You can, this is quite nice. You can, I don't want to steal your thunder, Grant. You could tell us a little bit if you wanted to, or.
Well, I was gonna nominate Taz, because she ran the session, and I've seen her name there, so maybe she'll come off mute for a second and talk us through it. Yeah.
Taz, are you there? Did you
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Sorry, I didn't need to
was that, by the way, was that volunteered?
It can always depend on you to call my name.
Was that volunteered or voluntold?
That's okay. What exactly specifically? I just want to know. I did place a link there to get a look at the board itself, but it usually takes roughly about 90 minutes or so to really play it, at least from what I've gathered from my time, because I use it a lot in my Kanban dojos at Cisco.
Awesome.
And it gets great, great feedback in terms of the interaction and what they learn. It's basically a great way to obviously understand work in progress, aging work, etc. But yeah, I would say run it one time yourself, and then there's actually a video on YouTube. I don't have the link. I can find it, but it also walks you straight through how to play it as well.
Yeah,
and I think it's a great, I get good feedback from it, and I would encourage others to try it out. Gamification is a great way to learn. So
absolutely, 100% agree.
What sort of talk you did, Taz?
It wasn't a talk. It was a simulation, a Twig simulation, which is the whip game. And it used to be, it was I think created by Leanability and Actionable Agile. So Leanability is accompanied by Klaus Leopold. Klaus Leopold is known for Flight Levels Academy, and then also he's well known in the Kanban community as well. So yeah, they offer it for free now. I think at one point it was, it did cost something, but it's free. And there's other things that we use when we're doing. I'm a Kanban trainer as well with Kanban University, so we typically will use like Okaloa Flow and also Feature Band for our training. But this one is just a nice, quick, free game or simulation to play when you want to, have a discussion around decision making as it relates to flow.
Thanks.
What you can do with this one as well, if you view analytics, all those visuals that I've just gone through, they're here as well. So you can run the Kanban simulation and you can see the impact that the changes and the decisions you've made has on, you know, cycle time and scatter plots and all the rest of it, which is kind of cool.
Just a quick one, Paul. Sorry for hijacking this. Taz, sorry to put you on the spot. We have a December spot available. If you'd be willing to give your knowledge and insights to this group as well, you're more than welcome.
You said December?
Yeah, start of December.
Start of December. Okay.
I'll connect with you.
I don't have any. Yeah, connect with me. I don't have anything scheduled presentation wise, so maybe yeah, I could potentially. I think
Yeah,
barring anything unforeseen, yes, I should be able to maybe
Great,
do that.
Thank you. Sorry, Paul. I
That's
just
okay.
couldn't resist. I just couldn't resist myself.
Tom said different.
Hi, Paul. So going back to story points, what would you say to a team that said made an argument for story points? Maybe that it helps the team to identify any misunderstandings in, you know, how they understand the story, or maybe it maybe help them to understand complexity or prioritization, identifying risk. Those, because they're two common arguments I hear for story points. So I wonder what your view is on that.
Yeah, I mean, some people kind of still use planning poker to help drive out the conversations, but as soon as you've had the conversations, then, you know, life's too short, move on. These are all guesses, estimates are guesses, life's too short. You're going to learn more by doing the work ultimately anyway. But also, like I said, if, you know, if using story points gives you value, awesome. You know, the expectations, Scrum as a lightweight framework, you are intended to pull in these other things that suit your context. But maybe if you take a group of people, if they've never heard or seen flow metrics, then, you know, most people I've come across just find these revelational, and generally never look back. So particularly if story points are giving you challenges, might be worth looking at. But you can't, you know, you cannot beat the conversation still. The conversations are the most important thing to get that shared understanding, and it's the shared understanding that you want.
Yeah, I guess the story points help drive that conversation, even if you don't take them forward, so you don't track or measure points, even if it's just to, you know.
So go through the mechanics of the planning
conversation,
and then as soon as you've had that, ditch them.
Any more questions?
I have one that I've had different answers for, both for myself and other people over the years. So about time, about the you know, proper clean collection of clean data to put in those things. I've had arguments about, you know, what to put in terms of effort related to you know, finishing up a task, a work item. And some people say, yeah, I'll just put the hours, the time that overall the team has spent on something, and then you have to, you know, ask the people to put accurate data in there in Jira, etc. And sometimes teams prefer to put effort data, meaning how not how much time they've spent, but how much, how can I say, how much time this task should have taken, you know, in order not to account for extra work hours, etc. I personally advocate for putting in real amount of time spent on a task, on a work item, but it's because I don't have anything better. I mean, time. What do you think of this, using time as a measure of how much?
I would first off ask, you know, what problem are we trying to solve here by doing that kind of approach, using real time, and that anywhere where you kind of put time measurements and that kind of thing, that's more just output again and command and control, more waterfall in nature. We need to be thinking more outcomes. And if we're getting challenged by, you know, others outside of our delivery teams to almost justify, you know, how you've spent your existence, we need those people to be understanding the importance of outcomes rather than outputs. You know, what are the goals we're after achieving? We've done some awesome things here. We delivered some great value. Focus on that. Focus on the change in behaviors rather than purely trying to keep everybody busy 100% all the time, because typically bad things happen off the back of that.
Paul, just to avoid any confusion, I'm not talking about in general. I'm talking about the data points you have in there in your actionable Agile dashboards.
Okay.
Measurements.
So these, okay. So these are at the actual product backlog item level. These are at the level of the things that give value, not at the tasks. So you might have a product backlog item, which is to, deliver some new fancy front end capability on your product. There might be a number of different tasks that you need to do to achieve that. What I've shown you here today is based off that product backlog item as a whole, the thing which gives value in its entirety, not to the underlying tasks underneath it.
Okay, and that entire work item or backlog item effort was measured how? What's in the
And it would then ultimately end up with a cycle time. Once you've done it, would end up with a cycle time. It took 11 days from start to finish.
All right, so it's always in day units, never in hours or something. Okay. Got it.
Great question.
Well, cycle time can be any time.
Yeah, it can be any time from
days. Yeah.
But if you're using some of this, you need to be using a consistent time factor. So if if one thing's in days, it's all in days kind of thing.
Yeah, otherwise it messes up the whole probability.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Yep. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Great questions.
The days plus one, because you had something that started and finished the same day.
Yeah, the actual cycle time is end date minus start date plus one. So you have at least one. So if you start and finish on the same day, you'd have at least a cycle time of one. Some tools, by the way, some of them I haven't used for a little while, but they used to come up with 0 cycle times. So if you ever see that, then that's probably odd. They've miscalculated cycle times. You can't have a cycle time of something that's finished, which is 0 days. Has to be at least one.
There are actually ways to tweak that and work with different units other than full day.
Okay.
Either the day is just 4 hours or 3-hour time blocks.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying you can tweak your.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you have to have consistent units. Otherwise, none of the calculations done there is going to be.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's apples and pears.
Grant, you get what I'm saying, right? Grant.
Yeah. And I think I wouldn't, when it gets down to splitting hairs over an hour or two, you've probably got bigger fish to fry than worrying about an hour here or there. I think it's the insights you get by looking at cycle time in general and the aging. It's far more beneficial. I mean, it's a bit like with estimates. I use a kind of a relative mass estimation with new teams, and it's risk, effort, and complexity, and they talk in those terms. And then I just have a little matrix at the end. Oh, it's low risk, low effort, low complexity. Oh, it's a 1, and it just gives them that. Oh, if anybody needs a number, they've got a number, but it's treated as a byproduct rather than the be all and end all. It's talking about the work is the important bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Anybody else? By the way, amazing questions. Great discussion. Any more questions?
I just have a comment to add. Is when we're fussing over all of this, we should ask ourselves, what are our stakeholders most interested in? And they'll probably say lead time. From the time we ask for and you've agreed to include something in the product backlog, how long do we have to wait? So lead time, which of course embraces that.
Yeah. For me, lead time. Yeah, lead time for me is just a form of cycle time. It's just that the start point is a little bit earlier, as you said, Ken. It's when somebody's got an idea in their mind through to when they actually get it. So lead time for me is just another form of cycle time with slightly widening start end dates.
And Jeff Sutherland and Scott Downing have a lot of data over the years on teams running Scrum pipelines. And their experience has been that the teams that estimate and do the estimation process tend to be the slowest, except for the teams that do it in actual hours, and they're even slower. So I've worked with some teams that didn't even estimate because the stories that they were handling, most of them were they've been there, done that before, you know, a familiar pattern.
Yeah.
And they just queued them up, and basically after they prioritized everything, they just ripped through it. Occasionally they'd have something new and strange, and they'd have some discussions about it.
Yep.
So I had actually made the comment on LinkedIn. Somebody brought this up. I'm glad to hear the words coming back. It's, you know, do the estimation and throw the points away.
Yeah.
Because it just provoked us to have deeper discussions. And the same thing with acceptance criteria. We start thinking and talking about what's it going to mean to have this done. We can focus a lot better because we have more shared understanding.
And that's what it's about, is a shared understanding through conversation, always. I won't go into the whole NASA Mars orbiter one. We'll save that for another day.
Thank you very much for walking us through this today.
You're welcome, and thank you all so much for you know, taking time out of your days to come along and attend this session. I hope it was useful. I hope it's planted a seed in one or two people's minds. Feel free to connect and stay in touch if we're not connected, and let me know how you get on.
Yeah,